Hey, Prime members! Are you tired of ads interfering with your favorite podcasts? Good news! With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free podcasts. That's amazon.com/ad-free podcasts to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
The world's most exciting podcast, home of borders, language, culture. And here he is, New York Times best-selling author and National Radio Hall of Fame inductee, Michael Savage.
I'm Michael Savage, host of the Savage Nation podcast, home of borders, language, and culture. Be here or be nowhere. The Savage Nation podcast.
Catch the Michael Savage podcast on all podcast platforms every Tuesday and every Friday.
The following is a presentation of Voyescape Media. You can find all of our travel podcasts from around the world at voyescape.com. Welcome to Travel in 10. This is where we try and bring you quick 10-minute overviews of some of our favorite places to go around the world. So if you're at the airport getting ready to get on a flight, you're at the gym looking for your next place to explore, just a quick overview of some of the best to see and do in destinations around the world. I'm David Brody. I started the Travel in 10 podcast back in 2005, one of the first travel podcasts online back then, and we've been doing episodes since. And this season, I'm joined for the full season by a good friend of mine. Tim, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, David. So my name is Tim Johnson. I'm a travel writer based in Toronto, but travel a lot. And I've been to almost 150 countries, all 7 continents. Just got back from my 6th trip to Antarctica and recording some of these episodes here in Maui, just sitting overlooking the Pacific Ocean here in one of my favorite places in the world. So I'm so excited to be a part of the podcast. I've known David for years. He's a great guy, super knowledgeable, and very, very excited to bring some of this travel knowledge that I've gained as I've traveled around the world to this podcast. So happy to be here.
So for this season, we're going to be talking about places that both me and you have been, I think, on all of the episodes that we've got planned, and some of our favorite spots. And we're starting on one, probably the first place where we met traveling together. So do you remember who you were on assignment for at the time when we met?
I wrote that article for the Vancouver Sun, and actually reread the article this morning and brought back all the memories of how fantastic that trip was.
And I was at the time, I've done throughout my career work for a ton of different travel brands, and I was working, doing a project for Tourism Australia. So I was overseeing a trip for a bunch of international journalists and had the great pleasure of meeting up with you in Melbourne. And then we toured around to about 3 or 4 cities from around Australia in the sort of 2 weeks following that as well. I've actually been back since. I've been back with my family almost exactly a year ago. Actually, we were in Melbourne. Again, when me and you were there, I guess it was about 2 years prior to that. But what do you love about Melbourne? What really stood out for you during our time there?
You know, it's just a beautiful city. And I love the fact that every neighborhood is kind of its own universe. You know, I mean, you don't often go to a city where you go to one neighborhood, say St. Kilda, it's got a certain feel, it's got a certain, type of people that gravitate there. And then you travel a couple blocks and you're in a completely different place. I would love to go back someday to Melbourne and just do one neighborhood per day, do like a week of different neighborhoods. And it'd be like going to 7 different cities because everything is so different. And it just is a city for me that emanates cool. You know, I always remember that they told us the coffee culture there was so strong that when Starbucks tried to come in, they said, no, thank you. You know, we have our own coffee. And so it's got a strong cafe culture, bar culture. Anyway, great city. Yeah.
One of the things I was super impressed with is like the street art was amazing. Everywhere you go throughout the city, you can find Bakesy's, you can find just like, there's so much amazing street art, so much culture. It reminded me of like, there's elements of kind of like New York, Montreal. It is a very hip city. There is no doubt about it.
Absolutely. I loved, we did that laneway tour in the CBD and in the Central Business District. And I still remember the guide or maybe one of the restaurateurs or whatever along the way saying that they used to call Melbourne the donut, because of the center of the city was empty. And they had some great civic efforts to bring back cafe and bar culture. And now that part of the city is just hopping. So for art, for food and drink, for everything, right in the heart of the city, it's just an amazing place.
Well, I think that, like, in terms of the why to go, one thing that jumped out to me is I think, like, a lot of people, particularly if you're from North America, they think of going to Australia and they think, oh, you're going to need like 3 weeks, 4 weeks. It's a long distance. There's so much to see and do. But I think you could easily do like Melbourne and the area that surrounds Melbourne just as its own standalone trip. Like there is enough there to make like a week in Melbourne would be totally worthwhile, and Melbourne and in and around that area as well.
Oh, totally agree. I mean, the Mornington Peninsula right there is an easy drive, and you get out there and it's just beaches and beautiful little villages. I think we're going to talk about it later, but the Great Ocean Road, and then everything in Melbourne, because there's so much diversity in terms of neighborhoods and districts and that right in the city. So I completely agree.
So if someone takes our advice, gets themselves over to Melbourne, what are your like 2 or 3 favorite things to do in the city?
Well, we did this together, and it's pretty much on my top 5 or 10 things that I've done in my life, and was the hot air balloon trip over the downtown. I've done lots of hot air balloons in different parts of the world, but I've never had the opportunity to do it right over the central business district, right over the downtown, right over those skyscrapers in the middle of the city. And they said they've been doing this for decades and it's been grandfathered in, would never be allowed if they were going to authorize it today. Just to soar and be there when the city is waking up, looking down and seeing people playing tennis and walking their dogs and just living their lives. And then to go up and over that ridge. I mean, I think, my heart skipped a beat just as we went right up over the top of those skyscrapers thinking, I hope we make it. And of course we did. It was just an absolutely thrilling thing.
It was an early wake up call though. I remember you got to be willing to, drag yourself out of bed early. I think we were up at like 4 in the morning, 3:30 in the morning.
Oh, literally a wake up call. I mean, literally, 2 wake up calls, for me, I think, one and then the follow up. Right. But that was a very early morning for sure.
You're absolutely right though. It was like such a unique experience to be like right going over the central downtown of a city, and it was a super cool experience. I would highly recommend it. Absolutely.
Yeah, I remember when we were going towards those skyscrapers, just thinking, are we high enough? And of course we were. I mean, the pilot knew what he was doing, and he's done it 100 times or 1,000 times. But yeah, just an absolute showstopper. It was incredible.
I mean, for me, the thing that really jumped out, I've talked about it a little bit, but the street art was amazing. I mean, whether it's Hosier Lane, AC/DC Lane, all these little tiny laneways all throughout the city with just like some of the best street art anywhere in the world, and so densely packed in. And there's a ton of people who you can go through Airbnb experiences, I know, where you could do, street art tours and have, one of the knowledgeable locals take you around and point out all the greatest pieces. But I was just so impressed with, like, not even just in the laneways, but everywhere throughout the city, this amazing street art that artists have used the whole city as their canvas. It's very cool.
Totally agree. And I, as a Seinfeld fan, I really appreciated, I don't know if you remember, there was a George Costanza way that they had painted a huge mural of George Costanza. I think it was that famous stuff, the art of seduction, that famous, and being a big Seinfeld fan, I really, appreciated that. And then also appreciated the fact that people said, okay, George is okay, but we really like Elaine. And they made one, a mural alley or laneway of Elaine, and they called it the Elaine Lane.
Yeah.
Which, I said, which I thought was great. Those were 2 of my favorites, just being a huge Seinfeld fan. But there was that one place we went to, and it was a rooftop place, a rooftop bar, and it was quirky and cool. I don't know if you remember, it was called Madame Brussels. And the woman who worked there, Miss Pearls,
Yeah.
And I remember she was just quirky and cool and so great at explaining what she loved about her bar and why people should come. And then the signature drink was the Double D cup, so you drink out of a Double D cup. So I thought that was just perfect for Central Melbourne, just, you wouldn't find that in a lot of cities. It was, she was a character. The whole city's filled with characters, and the drink was pretty good too. Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of where to eat, any of the places that stood out to you, I remember we had a few the food scene there in general was like really impressive. I remember there were a lot of different companies doing food tours. We did one with Hidden Melbourne. We did 2 or 3 different food tours while we were there. Any restaurants that really stood out to you?
I mean, Chin Chin was fantastic. And, that kind of Pan-Asian menu. And, Melbourne, it's such a melting pot of cultures as a city. And I thought Chin Chin kind of reflected that in their menu, and everything that we ate was delicious. And the food tours we did were fantastic too. Just little bites along the way. And again, having that diversity of culture reflected in all these little tiny hole-in-the-wall food places that we went to. What about you? What were some of your favorites?
Well, Chin Chin, I actually went. It's very rare for me to go back to a restaurant, and it is somewhere that I took my whole family back to because it was so good, and it was as good, just a few months ago as it was when we went. Highly recommended. I think definitely one of Melbourne's best restaurants. I remember we went to a cool. Melbourne had a lot of themed places, so we went to like a Viking themed Mjølner. I think it was called Mjølner. A Viking themed restaurant. I don't know if you remember this, where they brought out like a whole selection of like 20 different steak knives that were all like sort of medieval looking and different shaped. And but it was just, food was great. And beyond the gimmick, the food was very good as well.
I love it. What did you eat? Was it like giant turkey legs, or was it like and it shark? What was it, Viking food or?
There's a lot of meat involved. A lot of meat involved for sure. Yes, gravel axe and a lot of meat. Yeah,
I love it.
And in terms of where to stay, I remember we stayed at the time was like very new hotel, quite a cool boutique hotel downtown, the QT Melbourne. Which what really stood out to me about it was its rooftop bar. I remember it had a very cool rooftop bar. Got packed every night when we were there.
Yeah, that was a cool place. And I loved, because, it's a kind of a small, quirky Australian chain, right? The QTs. And, the focus on design, the focus on, making sure that the room didn't feel like just any other 4 or 5-star hotel room in the world. And it had the rooftop bar, and the room was great, and the location was fantastic. And so that was definitely, I'm going to agree with you on that was definitely the place that I really enjoyed staying.
There's a few cool Australian chains. I mean, QT is one of them. That's a bunch of boutique hotels across Australia. Ovolo Laneways. I checked out when I was in Melbourne as well, and it's very much right in the middle of that sort of central street art district. And usually it's pretty good value as well. I mean, Melbourne price. I did find hotels in Melbourne can be a little bit spendy. Yes. And it was one that tends to, you get better rates at, I would say sometimes.
Yeah, I stayed at an Ovolo up in Darwin, up in the Northern Territory, and it was great. I mean, the room was nice. The location was perfect. It really is a nice place to stay. So I love, that's a good brand as well.
And then the other one I have to shout out, because I'm a big Marriott hotels around the world. Mm-hmm. On our last trip, we were there for I think it was the opening weekend of the Le Méridien that had just opened up downtown in Melbourne. And it's
great,
really cool building. It used to be a historic theater. They still have elements of the theater incorporated into the hotel. Great rooms, and one of the nice things about it is a lot of the Envoy hotels. It's hard to get rooms for a whole family, for a family of 4, where they had rooms that would accommodate 4 people there. And it was very cool when we arrived, because the hotel had just opened. The GM, the general manager, was there to greet us when we arrived at the hotel, and realized it was the same general manager who had met our family when we came to stay at one of the opening weekends at their Sheraton Tokariki in Fiji, and he remembered us from there as well. So
I love that.
I think he thinks that we traveled to all the openings of Marriott hotels around the world.
Yeah, well, you were at 2. That's a lot, I mean,
that's the GM. Cool. That's great.
More than most people. So, sounds like a great property. It really does. Yeah.
Final tips. Any like one last can't miss hidden treasure that you would say for people to check out?
I always like to point out one can't miss and one hidden treasure. So for me, the can't miss, and it's one that you can miss if you don't know about it necessarily, is Brighton Beach, which is just 20 minutes by train. You just hop on a train from the Central Business District in Melbourne, and it is that iconic, beautiful. I mean, it's in a kind of a sheltered bay, So you can go paddle boarding or you can go kayaking, and it's got those bright, what do they call them? Bathing boxes, I think they're called.
Yeah.
And built in the 1900s, you know, so when people would go down there, they would just want a place to change into their bathing suits, have a little bit of privacy. And now those, I believe they're sort of passed down through the generations. Probably you can rent some of them. But this very, very iconic Melbourne scene. And then for my hidden treasure, you know, it's also aquatic. Melbourne's a city surrounded by water. So I loved doing a Yarra River cruise where you get a lot of the history about this river that leads into Melbourne. They call it the world's only upside down river because of how muddy it is on the surface. But anyway, and they'll tell you more details about that. But gold rush history from the 1850s. And the one I went on was not this one, but there is, and I was just looking online, and there is one offered that offers bottomless cocktails. So I think the next time I visit Melbourne, that will be sort of high on the agenda. So yeah.
Well, now I'm disappointed because I've been twice and I've missed your can't miss both times. And every time we've gone, Brighton Beach has been like on my list of things we need to go do, and we've missed it both times. So it gives me good reason to go back to Melbourne for a third time. Absolutely.
And I can't wait to go back. I mean, it's such an amazing city, such a cool city, but still a friendly city. So yeah, I'm looking forward to whenever I can get back to Melbourne.
Okay, well, we have gone way over our 10 minutes because we had so much that we wanted to pack in. But
Great.
We will have all of our recommendations in the show notes on the website, and we're also going to have a downloadable guide. We're building out downloadable guides for each of the destinations that we cover this season that people can go onto the website and get more details, sort of our recommended itinerary. So if you're looking for a little bit more detail or you found some of this useful, hopefully something great that people can go onto the site and download and help get themselves ready for a trip to Melbourne.
Perfect.
Coming up, we have got a series of shows we're going to be doing this season, and the next one we've got coming up next week is Paris, if I'm not mistaken, Tim.
I'm looking forward to talking about Paris. One of my favorite cities in the whole world. The city I just can't get enough of. It's different every time you go, so very much looking forward to it.
Olympics coming up there soon. Ton of people from around the world who are going to be traveling there. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that in the next episode, so look forward to reconnecting next week.
Yeah, talk to you then. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Tim. Bye. You've been listening to a podcast from the Voyescape Podcast Network. You can find all of our podcasts from around the world at voyescape.com.